Do you think that playing the black side of the Spanish is boring? If so, you'll have an entirely different opinion on the Spanish after trying this gambit. The attacking move f5 has many purposes. It takes aim at white's e4 pawn and helps opening the f-file in the future for the rook after we castle. What's cool about it is that accepting the gambit is already a mistake. You just push the e-pawn. The knight has no squares but g1, and after the direct queen g5, g5 and knight f6, when white defends with h3, you crash through on the king side with h5. Black is better here. White can instead pin your e-pawn with queen e2. We play queen e7 and the knight is now forced to retreat, leaving the d4 square for our knight with a great fork. Our knight attacks everything in white's camp. White's best attempt to save the game is to check, but we simply move the king. Bishop a4 will be played, defending c2, and after knight f6, b5 and c5, we have a decisive advantage with our superbly placed pieces and white's total absence of development. To avoid the decisive knight jump on d4 we just witnessed, white should take it at once. Both recaptures are possible, but I like taking with the d-pawn, paving the way for our light-squared bishop. White will attack the e-pawn with queen e2 and d3, but after queen e7 and exchanges on e4, we enter an advantageous endgame. We have the bishop pair and we will later decide between shattering white's pawn structure by taking the knight, or simply castling either side. Another option on move 4 is to defend the e4 pawn with the strange queen e2. Bringing the queen out this early cannot be a good idea. We take on e4 and play knight f6 with a tempo on the exposed queen. White goes back to e2. We must do something about our e5 pawn. Our Silicon friend Stockfish recommends bishop d6, reinforcing the central pawn. It's true that developing the light-squared bishop will be tough, at least as long as black doesn't take the c6 knight. However, if white really wants to win a pawn, he will take on c6, allowing us to free our c8 bishop after recapturing with the d-pawn. After black takes, we simply castle with more than enough compensation for the missed pawn. We will take advantage of the vulnerable pieces on the e-file. White must play calmly with knight c3 and castle when the position is fine. From here, we have lots of plans. We can expand on the queen side with a6 and b5 before putting our bishop in fianchetto. We can also jump on d4 with the knight. Note that as soon as white takes on c6, the diagonal is free for our bishop and it can land on f5 or g4. Your opponent can be simplistic and take on c6 at once, as in the exchange variation. As always, we take with the d-pawn. As in many Spanish variations, the e5 pawn is immune in the early opening, due to the standard fork with queen d4. We reach a completely equal endgame according to the engine. White may protect his pawn with his knight when we develop in a classic way. The only challenging variation to look at starts after d4, e takes d4 and e5 forking. Taking on c3 is forced. The top engine line is e takes f6 with check, king f8, e takes g7 check, king g7 and castles. The engine evaluates this as completely equal, but in a human game, the better player will surely win. Finally, the most challenging sideline is d4, blowing up the center. Before diving in, I will kindly ask you to hit the like button so that the channel can spread to more people. Thank you for doing that. Back to d4. We take the unprotected e4 pawn. White can choose between bishop takes c6 and knight takes e5. First bishop c6, with the idea of taking on f3 with the bishop after e takes. We take the bishop with the d-pawn, as usual. After bishop d6 and castles, the game revolves around the central squares. We want to challenge the e5 knight with a later queen e7, or reinforce our central e-pawn with the maneuver queen e8 to g6. We can also attack the d4 pawn with c5, weakening the white's knight support. The position is interesting with equal chances. The most complicated line of this video starts after knight takes e5. We take on e5 and white recaptures. We attack the bishop with c6, and if white moves the bishop, we will play queen a5 check and take on e5 with a better game. The main move by white here is the crazy knight c3, sacrificing his bishop. White only has one pawn for his missing bishop, but he will make our development difficult after knight takes e4. Knight f6 is not possible because of the e5 pawn. Our f8 bishop doesn't have many squares either. Without the freeing pawn sacrifice d5, disturbing the knight, it would have been difficult to bring our pieces out. White's e-pawn is deflected, allowing us to play knight f6. Bishop g5 puts more pressure, pinning the knight. Now we play queen a5 check, a key move, forcing black to move one of his pieces backward. The main move is knight c3, and after b4, bishop takes f6, g takes f6 and knight d5, the position is equal in Engine's eyes. Of course, you can analyze this more, but we are already on move 13, and this particular position will hardly ever appear in any of your games, unless you are playing a grandmaster. We are done for now. In a future video, I will present you the main lines with fourth move knight c3 and d3. If you like the video, consider subscribing. I'll see you in a future video.